Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, 2 decades and 5 elections into the new South Africa, and the media are a big part of the story. Clickbait, those teasing headlines you just hate yourself for clicking on. The Russian media have marched to the Kremlin's beat on Ukraine. They've got the medals to show for it. And buckle up, India.
Hey, naughty girl. तेरे boyfriend को बोल दे seat belt ऐसा पहनने का.
For a different kind of web video of the week. It's been 20 years since South Africa held its first truly democratic election, the one that brought Nelson Mandela's African National Congress to power. The ANC under President Jacob Zuma has just won its 5th term, but not by the margin it would have liked. The ANC has frequently blamed its political problems on the country's media, particularly the printed press, which the ruling party says is fixated on the negative and not the ANC's accomplishments. Switch on the state-owned broadcaster where most South Africans get their news, and it's usually a different story. The SABC came under fire this election for refusing to air the campaign ads of the main opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, the DA. The network dismissed the ads as a publicity stunt that violated broadcast regulations. The DA accused the SABC of censorship. And 20 years into the new South Africa, there are still racial subplots. The country remains divided, just not the way that it once was. Our starting point this week is Pretoria.
Higher with your vote.
The majority of the people in this country depend on the SABC for news.
As an opposition party in South Africa, it isn't always easy to be able to put your message on public broadcast.
The media has never been favorable to the ANC. Media has become synonymous with opposition.
We are not overly critical just because it's the ANC, it's because it's a ruling party.
4 voices on the South African media and the coverage of the election. The opposition candidate who says the state-owned SABC censored his party's campaign ad. The SABC spokesman who denies that. The government spokesman who accuses the media of opposing President Zuma's ANC. And the deputy editor who disputes that and says that his paper's only agenda is covering the news.
So they tried to silence us, but this is actually what they're afraid of.
They, according to the opposition Democratic Alliance Party, are the powers that be at the state-owned SABC, which refused to broadcast a previous DA ad that pulled no punches on the ruling ANC.
It's an ANC that is taking us backwards. 200 million rands is spent on upgrading the president's private house. We've seen a police force killing our own people.
It was that line in particular.
We've seen a police force killing our own people.
That the SABC cited when it refused to air the ad. The channel said it was simply following the rules, and the ANC government supported the channel's decision.
It's in their ad now. Once you say we are corrupt, you must bring evidence to show that we are corrupt. So that ad is in fact in contravention of our electoral laws that says you cannot publish falsehoods about any organization. But I'm not part of the SABC. I therefore cannot respond on behalf of the SABC. Go to them.
They know the regulations, and the regulations are not SABC regulations. They are very clear. They say you cannot be allowed as a political party to be seen to be inciting violence. And when they bring adverts to us, for example, the DA1 was saying that the police are killing our people. And we ask them, where have you ever seen the police killing your people? Because now we are creating a bad name for the police, and we are saying the people must then attack the police because police are not a political party.
We've got evidence to substantiate that. We said the ruling party had changed, and that ultimately we had problem with police brutality, which are facts that the electorate know. What then happened is that the public broadcaster then said, look here, you can't criticize the government. You can't say the police are killing our own people, which in fact is a factual statement that is true.
And the evidence is not hard to find. There was the strike at Marikana in 2012, and the day the police shot and killed 34 striking miners. But the SABC has a larger problem with credibility, and the broadcaster knows it. In 2013, it commissioned a study into its falling ratings, which concluded that viewers saw the network as biased in favor of the ANC, imbalanced on stories such as Marikana and the money spent on the president's home. And it said there is a perception that the SABC's content is decided not by its editors, but by the politicians the channel answers to. And with more recent studies concluding that the ANC got more than twice as much campaign coverage on the SABC than the DA did, those perceptions will not have changed.
Every year there are elections, we get all the political parties, starting from the ruling party up to the last, complaining about coverage, because all of them want the coverage from the SABC because they demand that we have outside in the public. Therefore, we are not worried by that because we hear it year in, year out. And what we want to make very clear is there is no indication anywhere where we are going to be regarded as the mouthpiece of the ruling party.
We feel that there's political pressure put on the public broadcaster. In fact, when you look at the news, even when you see a story about how the ruling party is covered vis-a-vis how other political parties are covered, doesn't even begin to make editorial sense. It's all a function of really political pressure being put on the media here, particularly the public broadcaster.
You could see the bias, and even editors, even credible journalists at the SABC who just want nothing but carry on with their professional duties. They were put under pressure by the management to say, don't portray the ruling party this way. We don't want this particular party. We don't want these particular politicians to be on air. So it was more of, I wouldn't say editorial, because there are a lot of good journalists at the SABC. I would say managerial interference to a larger degree.
We asked the SABC to comment on the internal study, but were unsuccessful. The South African print media have reported aggressively on Jacob Zuma and the ANC. The Mail and Guardian has led the way on coverage on the Marikana mine story, all that taxpayers' money spent on the president's residence. And in 2005, when Zuma was accused of rape and suggested that the risk of contracting HIV in a country racked by the infection could be minimized by showering after sex, the paper's cartoonist, Jonathan Shapiro, lampooned him mercilessly. The SABC goes easy on the government, and it's as though the newspapers are trying to provide some kind of editorial counterbalance.
Media in this country and some segment of international media don't think that people should vote for the ANC. But people have always defied these media houses and voted for the ANC. And even in this instance, no matter what the Mail and Guardian says, no matter there are others who have now openly said, vote for an opposition party. But that is the opposition stance that media has always, in our view, always basically taken. So we are not surprised. We are not surprised at all that they have taken this stance. In fact, they are opposition to the ANC.
In 1999, 1994, 2004, there was no noise when we endorsed the ANC, but we just feel that too much power has led to a culture of unaccountability, a culture of arrogance, which has really made the party ineffective. What we are saying is that there must never be a party that is morally entitled, or that feels that is morally entitled to people's votes. They must work for it. And as the media, I don't see why we can't do that.
The print media in South Africa is still lively, but the taming of the SABC is not the only concern as the country goes forward. There's a secrecy law before Parliament, vehemently opposed by the media, that would make any journalist found guilty of revealing classified national security information liable to up to 25 years in jail. Indeed, the government tried to use the security argument to stop the news coming out on the millions spent on President Zuma's private home. For the government's critics, the issue is not just the state of the South African media today, it's where this story is going.
My anxiety here is that in the next 5 years, the ANC realizes that they could lose power, they could start to co-opt it more. So you then end up in a space where democracy is being undermined. It's the co-option of state. So I think we've got to be able to fight harder and allow for the independence of the media to remain, whether it be print, whether it be television, or even social media.
Our Global Village Voices now on journalism in today's South Africa.
Broadly speaking, the media have played a fairly effective role in terms of covering the various political parties on their respective campaign trails. They have failed at, covering social issues beyond the narrow focus of the elections.
To a large extent, the media in South Africa is fairly unbiased. The DA and the ANC both make use of social media platforms such as Twitter. The DA, however, has been making use of Twitter for much longer and are therefore much more effective.
I think the media played a vital role in the lead up to these elections. In many cases, it has caused a shift in support from one party to another. In terms of coverage, I think it's been very widespread, with a tremendous amount of information given, to really help people be informed about the decisions that they are making at the end of the day. In terms of TV broadcasting, I think the coverage has been fair, apart from the state-owned SABC, which delayed campaign adverts from other parties from being broadcasted.
Time now for Listening Post News Bites. There's an all-too-familiar postscript to the piece that we did last week on the number of journalists killed in the Philippines. Another voice in the media there has been silenced by the gun. 35-year-old Richard Najid was the acting manager of DXNN Power Mix FM radio in the province of Tawi-Tawi. He was shot May 4th and died later in hospital. The motive was not immediately known, but police angered the media community by saying that Najid was not a journalist, but just one disc jockey. Najid was in fact the host of a regular news and current affairs program. In a statement, the National Press Club, the NPC, likened the police's attitude to that of President Benigno Aquino the day before Najid's murder during a press conference with U.S. President Barack Obama. Aquino got it wrong when he misstated the number of journalists killed in a 2009 politically motivated massacre in Maguindanao, saying that 52 had been killed, not 32. The NPC's president, Joel Sai Edco, said this is a clear indication of plain disregard for the deadly plight of Filipino journalists. He, the president, couldn't even get his facts straight. The Turkish government is fighting back against criticism of its record on media freedom, particularly its reputation for jailing journalists. On May 1st, the U.S.-based rights advocacy organization Freedom House downgraded Turkey's press freedom status from partly free to not free. That's the same category it gives countries like Libya, South Sudan, Ukraine, and Zambia. Clearly not the kind of company Turkey wants to keep, because the next day Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoglu called on Turkish journalists to reject the report. A number of media outlets were happy to comply, including the Star Daily, Türkiye Gazetesi, and Yeni Akit. They all ran stories to discredit the source by linking Freedom House to the U.S. State Department, George Soros, and some pro-Israel lobby groups. But Freedom House is not alone. The Paris-based Reporters Without Borders ranks Turkey 154th of the 180 countries it lists on its press freedom rankings, describing Turkey under the Erdogan government as one of the world's biggest prisons for journalists, and saying that 2014 is likely to be a decisive year for the future of civil liberties in Turkey. There's a new award for quality journalism. You've heard of the Pulitzers, the Pokes, and the Emmys. How about the Kremlins? The eligibility requirement, you've got to be Russian and loyal to Moscow's narrative on Ukraine. On May 5th, the Vedomosti newspaper reported that President Vladimir Putin issued a decree last month awarding the Order of Service to the Fatherland Medal to more than 300 Russian journalists, editors, and TV personalities for, the article said, their high-level professionalism and objective coverage of events in Crimea. Putin's spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, confirmed the decree to the Moscow Times, but refused to add details. Among those honored, Russia Today's chief editor, Margarita Simonyan, who at the height of the crisis tweeted, "Ukraine, rest in peace." Then there's Dmitry Kisilyev of Rossiya Sugodnya, who went on television saying Russia is the only country in the world that is realistically capable of turning the United States into radioactive ash. Kisilyev missed out on this round of honors, but he got the same medal 3 months ago for what the Kremlin called many years of conscientious work. Critical journalists did not make the cut. There are already some parodies of the awards in the Russian Twitter sphere, including one hashtag that translates as "Send that studio a medal." If the following piece was something that you clicked on online rather than a television news story, the headline might read, "We took a look at clickbait, and the results were amazing." Clickbait is, as the name implies, the headline that entices but does not inform, the one that we cannot resist clicking on even when we know we're being suckered into it. Because clickbait seldom delivers on its promise. But since it's designed to get the site's clicks first and satisfy users second, it's not going away anytime soon. And as some news outlets have learned at their expense, there are some stories that web surfers just don't want to be manipulated over. The Listening Post's Will Young now on the clickbait scourge and the tricks of a slightly devious, sometimes ingenious, and growing trade.
Seriously, wow.
69 facts about New Zealand.
21 pictures that will
restore your faith in humanity.
20 things
that will blow your mind.
Aren't headlines supposed to tell us what's in a story so you can decide whether to read it? Since when did they start promising to blow your mind?
It's that sort of feeling that it's irresistible and you have to click on it. This is a very typical clickbait headline. A guy took a photo in the dark with flash on. What it captured is terrifying beyond words. It doesn't tell you what at all this is about, but it raises the, gee, terrifying beyond words? What could it possibly be?
So even if you feel kind of cynical about the headline and don't really want to read the story, you are almost going to have to click. There was a headline that was something like, this kid died. What he left behind is one-tacular, like wonderful stuck into spectacular. And you just never find out in the headline what the one-tacular thing is. Headlines used to be more descriptive because they assumed that the reader was kind of there to read news. Now, so you're there not to be bored.
BuzzFeed probably precedes them all. They have the list thing going, I think. They own that before Upworthy. People weren't really aware of the topic quite as much, but because Upworthy keeps using the headlines in that way, and that's really how they became such an overnight success that then was mirrored by different sites. I've actually started rebelling against it. Even if it seems interesting, I'm like, no, not going to do it.
So maybe you clicked, but did the content literally blow your mind? Did it restore your faith in humanity? Probably not. We invited BuzzFeed and Upworthy to explain their headline writing policies to us, but they said they'd rather not. We did get the Huffington Post's managing editor on camera, and he says, despite what some readers might think, clickbait isn't part of the website's modus operandi.
We've all gone through the experience on the internet of clicking on something, arriving at a page, and then kind of being disappointed or having it feel a little flat. That, for us, is something we try to avoid at all costs. And I think that's one of the things that may distinguish us from places that are really pushing the limit. One example that comes to mind for me is the headline that we did for the government shutdown. When the government shutdown ended, we wrote the headline, "Men got us into the shutdown, women got us out." It had that bite to it. It had that humor. It kind of crystallized the moment in the right way. There were probably very few differences between the story that we wrote and the story that Politico wrote and the story that the Journal wrote and the story that the New York Times wrote. But I would, if I had to guess, our headline probably drew more people to our story than theirs did.
And in the end, there's nothing more important than getting those clicks. In the online economy, page views equal advertising revenue. But are any methods justified for any story?
In February, CNN tried clickbait tactics on a story about rape statistics. There was a backlash. The headline might have read, CNN tried out a clickbait headline, and the results shocked everybody.
I understand that CNN would want to draw traffic to its article, but I don't think that that's enough of a justification with stories that are really controversial or need more nuance. You know, we're talking about rape here. How in the world can you use that kind of a clickbait headline for that type of a topic?
CNN didn't see it that way. In response to its critics, it posted another tweet. Thanks for feedback. It's genuinely surprising Alaska's rape rate is so high. The story deserves attention. You may or may not agree with them, but what about this tweet from CNN from the previous month? 14-year-old girl stabbed her little sister 40 times, police say. The reason why will shock you.
There are tactics that are okay for some newcomers that probably aren't okay for a CNN. Mainstream media are facing competitors like Upworthy and others that are growing tremendously. And they would be remiss if they didn't notice this and try to figure out how they could use some of these tactics. Now, the problem is mainstream media has legacy brands to protect, and these new outlets like Upworthy don't have that.
In the battle for online eyeballs, media outlets tend to follow the traffic. As BuzzFeed and Upworthy's page view figures have skyrocketed, other websites have copied the clickbait formula. But there's another factor at play here, which is less about the headlines and more about one particular website that's driving a lot of those clicks: Facebook. When the social media giant changed what's known as its newsfeed algorithm last year, that one change channeled all kinds of highly clickable content right there where you're most likely to see it. Suddenly, clickbait was everywhere.
The newsfeed is what you see when you log into Facebook.com. So it's like the main way that Facebook shows you content. The effect of this algorithm change was so enormous that publishers started to kind of target their stories toward Facebook users. And the Upworthy style headline really seems to work well there.
I think that the way that news is now viewed is really heavily influenced by social media and the type of social media that's available. 10 years ago, you didn't have people using Facebook. You didn't have people using Twitter. Now, you share it on Facebook, you share it on Twitter. I think we will definitely experience clickbait fatigue. We're already seeing it. We're going to get tired of those types of headlines. But sites and publications change with the times. So what's clickbait this year is not going to be clickbait next year.
So when you're killing time on the internet and a headline grabs you,
69 facts about New Zealand.
They're literally out of this world.
will you rise to the clickbait?
More Global Village voices now on the whole clickbait thing.
Clickbaiting is rife online today because it works. That's the simple truth of the matter. But many people feel that clickbaiting is cheapening the journalist's art. Clickbait is by design, it's ephemeral, it's fleeting, it's designed to elicit an immediate, almost unthinking response from the reader. It's ultimately not a very comfortable relationship either for the journalist or the reader. In the end, superb content is what really wins, not these sensationalist headlines that are here for the moment and not going to be here for the long run.
With clickbait, we're really talking more about the headline. That formula of X will make you Y, or this thing happened and you won't believe what happened next. This said, if a clickbaity title gets more people reading a great piece, I think that's only a good thing. Though, it can feel a little bit cheap, the deception, the bait part. Because essentially when you use a clickbaity title, you're saying that the content doesn't matter. Right now, maybe people are getting wise to it, sure, but still they're keeping on clicking.
Finally, there's a new public safety initiative underway in India. Do the math and it's simple. When you have more than 1 billion people on or around the roads, you can save a lot of lives just by convincing Indians to buckle up their seatbelts. What sets this message apart, though, are the messengers, hijras, Indian transgenders who have traditionally traded their roadside blessings for a few rupees. They're the ones providing the sales pitch, and they're borrowing a thing or two from flight attendants and their safety demonstrations. The so-called seatbelt crew have had more than 1 million hits so far. We've made them our web video of the week, and we'll see you next time at The Listening Post.
Transgenders, better known as hijras in India, are not like their counterparts elsewhere in the world. Indians consider them sacred, touched by God. Their blessings are auspicious and generally accompanied by their signature clapping. They're often invited to bless newborns and newlyweds. In fact, most hijras make their living by exchanging blessings for cash at traffic signals.
कृपया ध्यान दीजिए ये है वो अटेंशन प्लीज अगर पायलट के जैसे गाड़ी चला रहे हो तो पायलट के जैसा सेफ्टी भी चाहिए तेरी गाड़ी में ऑक्सीजन मास्क नहीं है कुर्सी के नीचे लाइफ जैकेट नहीं है मगर सीट बेल्ट तो है तो पहना क्यों नहीं रे मैं सिखा दूं क्या इधर से बेल्ट ले लो और अपने बॉडी के सामने से खींचो और जांघों के बाजू में ऐसा फिट कर लो जब तक क्लिक नहीं सुनाई दे इतना गोरा गोरा मुंह एक्सीडेंट के बाद अच्छा नहीं लगेगा ए नॉटी गर्ल तेरे बॉयफ्रेंड को बोल दे सीट बेल्ट ऐसा पहनने का ए चिकना माल वीडियो मत ले सीट बेल्ट लगा